we're back on our McFiles late night Thursday special. Grateful to have everybody back with us. We got a great interview coming up here in just about 2 minutes. I'm going to just set the stage for this. January Smith Littlejohn. We had her on a couple of times last year, and this is going to be her first official appearance of 2025, and hopefully one of many to come. She had mentioned to me last week that she would be going to D.C., but I didn't know for what. I just felt like it was something that, and she said, we don't want people to know about this yet. And I said, well, that's fine. So we didn't mention it on the interview at all. And I was sitting, it never occurred to me what she was going to D.C. for. Tuesday night, I was watching the coverage, like all of you. I was watching Fox, and they were scanning the audience, and boom, January popped up. I said, look at there, it's January Smith. And then I listened to the speech, and President Trump recognized my dear friend for her fight against the trans agenda. And for those of you that have not heard January's story, she will tell you a little bit about it here in just a minute, of what happened to their daughter, who's now 18, graduating Leon County High School, Leon County, I should say, Florida. I grew up in Leon County. I'm from North Florida, South Georgia. I wasn't born there, but I spent most of my teen life, really since I was 12 years old, up to the time I was 31. So that's almost a third of my life in that area. Lived in Tallahassee, the capital city of Florida. And there are certain parts of Florida that are very blue, these cities being one of them. Tallahassee's a blue city. And there's a lot of local agendas that are not good. And this fight came to the Littlejohn's home directly when their daughter came home one day and was telling them that the school system was encouraging her to transition from a girl to a boy. And January took it upon herself to confront the Leon County School Board legally, and the court sadly sided with the school. And there's an appeal going on right now, and they've not heard back on the appeal. And we'll see how that plays out. We're going to talk a little bit about this after the show. We're not going to be on long tonight afterwards. So if you got your questions, I want you to hold on to them, but have them ready after we get through with this interview. It's a great interview, and I appreciate my friend, whom I've known now about a year and a half, and never met her. We're hoping to soon in person. My brother ran into her one day, and I told January before the show came on, I said, please don't judge me by my brother. She promised me she wouldn't. And no, she said John was very kind to her, and I know he was. I love my brother. I love my brothers, and we're just McDonald boys. But listen, we hope you'll enjoy this interview tonight. Hold your questions till the end. I promise we'll give you a chance to chime in on this. But you want to listen to this. This was done just a day or two before she was in D.C. Tuesday night to represent a lot of parents that are fighting this fight. And when you get down to it, it's not just the parents that are fighting this fight, folks. It's all of us, because our kids are our most precious treasure, and we don't need to forget that. And people like January Smith Littlejohn are heroes in my book for putting their money where their mouth is and fighting for the integrity of their children and to stop this agenda that is going to destroy this country if it's not held in check. Here's January Smith Littlejohn and your host, Christopher McDonald. Enjoy the interview. It's about a half hour. It's going to keep you riveted to your seats, and we'll be back to talk to you after this, okay? Be blessed tonight. We're grateful to have you on the McFiles Late Night Special. Enjoy January Smith Littlejohn. She's a precious friend and a precious warrior and a precious woman of God. She's a woman of faith, and I hope you enjoy. And a good evening, everybody. Chris McDonald with you on a very special pre-recorded McFiles interview. I'm so grateful to have my dear friend, January Smith Littlejohn. I'm grateful that she's with us tonight. She's been with us before. It's been a while, and this is her first official 2025 appearance on the McFiles. And January, we're always grateful to have you. And I I just want to tell you, I've always respected what you've done with your fight against this onslaught against our kids. And I know this has touched your family personally, and that's one of the reasons why you got in this fight. And we'll talk about that tonight. But let me just say, welcome to the McFiles again. It's so good to see you. And we're looking forward to another good discussion tonight about what's going on in our country.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be with you.
Let me, there's some folks, there may be a few, not many, but who have not been with us on previous interviews. I do want you to just, if you don't mind at the beginning, tell us a little bit about what happened with your daughter briefly and then where all of it stands. I know that Leon County, I lived in Tallahassee for many years, and it's the capital of Florida, and grew up in that area of the country. And it was somewhat surprising, to be frank with you, when you told me what was going on, because that usually that area of North Florida is a somewhat conservative area of the country, but that Leon County area is not. It's interesting. Tell us what happened to your daughter and how this affects everybody out here in this audience tonight, because it's the same fight we're all fighting. It's just touched your house individually.
Sure. Well, and unfortunately, Chris, our case is not an isolated case. I hear from parents all over the country, and the same thing has happened to their family. But at the height of COVID in 2020, our 13-year-old daughter came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. This was shortly after three of her friends at the local middle school had also suddenly started identifying as some form of transgender. And I say that because, when we think of that word, we think of children in early childhood, identifying as the opposite sex, experiencing distress starting from a very young age. That is just not what we are seeing now. We are seeing an explosion of predominantly teen girls at the thrust of puberty, experiencing discomfort with their body. And instead of being told, you're going to get through this, it's okay, everybody goes through hard times during puberty, they're told if you're experiencing any kind of discomfort with your body, it may be because you're trans. And then you couple that with what's called gender identity ideology, which is what is being taught in our schools, in programming, in movies. And children are being falsely told that they have something called a gender identity. This is an internal feeling that is completely separate from their sex, and that they actually can choose to be a boy, girl, neither or both. This is where we started hearing words like non-binary, gender fluid. And when I was trained as a mental health counselor back in the late 90s, Chris, these words were not around. This was non-existent. This issue was not happening. So the explosion that we are seeing with teen girls like my daughter suddenly proclaiming that they are born in the wrong body, falsely believing that the only way to alleviate their distress is through radical, mutilating medical interventions that are not FDA approved, by the way. So what we have happening is you have these girls who are experiencing an identity crisis, a mental health issue. And they're being sold the lie that the only way to alleviate that mental health issue is to make physical, radical changes to their young bodies. And so, we were thrust into this issue back in 2020. You had parents at that time up in arms because the schools were closed. People were up in arms about masking their children with no evidence to show that that would be helpful. But my husband and I were in a very, very different fight of our own. And I just, looked around and felt like we were in the twilight zone. And so, long story short, your audience can go back and look at some previous interviews. But the school, when the school started in the fall of 2020, they took it upon themselves to socially transition my daughter without our knowledge or consent. And what that means is it went well beyond using a nickname or different pronouns. They actually do what's called a gender support plan with children. Thankfully, that plan has now been rescinded in our state because of legislation that has been passed. But they sit these children, and by the way, this gender support plan, Chris, is still being used in over 20,000 schools nationally. You can go to an organization called Gender Spectrum and see an example of these gender support plans. But what they really are is social transition plans, where they are sitting a child down alone in a room, oftentimes without the parents even knowing. and they are completing this 6-page document asking these young children questions that can absolutely impact their safety, like they did with my daughter, such as which restroom and locker room do you prefer to use? And which sex do you prefer to room with on overnight field trips? And then they ask the child, how should we refer to you when speaking to your parents? Should we use your birth name and pronouns or your new trans name? And this is to effectively deceive parents that these psychosocial interventions in the form of social transition has even occurred. So, Chris, my husband and I, we are not litigious people. We naively thought that once we bring the evidence to the school that what they are doing is actually causing harm, not just in the parent-child relationship, like in our situation, but causing harm to these children. Because, Chris, my daughter's distress was real, but the answer was not a double mastectomy. And that is what we are talking about here. We are talking about placing children on a irreversible medical pathway, turning them into lifelong medical patients, oftentimes before they've even had their first kiss. So you're talking about sterilizing vulnerable children. And we just came to the conclusion, unfortunately, that they weren't going to stop. We made the very difficult decision to file the first federal lawsuit citing harm in this area. And since then, there have been about 25 other lawsuits nationally, and those are in various stages of litigation. My lawsuit was dismissed in December of 2022, and then we are now appealing the decision at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we're awaiting their decision on the dismissal.
I was about to say, you have not heard from that decision. Do you have any idea? Is there any inclination when they're actually going to hear it, or
We've already done oral arguments that occurred back in April of last year. So we are now awaiting the 3-panel decision.
Wow, that's a long time. Usually they would get back to you a lot sooner. Let me ask you this. Everything changed. Last time I had you on here, I think it was before the election or maybe right after the election. But I know that with President Trump in the White House, the whole atmosphere of D.C. has changed toward things that you've just described. We had an administration in January. Honestly, in all my life, and I've been on this planet about 60 years now, I'd never seen a 4-year period of time where such evil was unleashed upon a nation against our children. And it was done from a federal level. It was not just because, look, there's always been evil in this world. We've always had the influence of Hollywood, the influence of movies, the influence of very bad, evil people that want to attack kids and do these things. It may have been under the surface. It seems like these last 4 years, this stuff become mainstream to the point that it seemed like every time you turned around, you were hearing about biological males in sports. You were hearing about what your daughter went through. The school system basically criminalizing you and your husband, basically, and that's what they wanted to do. If a parent stood up and said, "Hey, I don't want you doing that," the school basically told you, "Hey, it's our kid, it's not yours." I mean, but it had never been supported on a federal level from the White House, and that all changed in 2020. You spoke of 2020, and then it's just like everything has shifted again to somewhat of common sense. And President Trump came out very quickly. There's 2 genders, male and female. And then I think that day that he signed that executive order, which really needs to be capsuled in the law, that a biological male cannot participate with females in any age group, any sports. And he basically this past week took on the Maine governor to her face. I mean, you got to give Trump credit. You can like him, hate him, or love him. Trump did not mind taking her on to her face and told her, if you don't continue, because she's basically one of these that thumbed her nose at that and said, well, we here at Maine, we're going to keep doing it. Well, he told her, we're going to take your federal money away if you do. And she said, oh, I'll sue you. And he said, well, we'll see you in court. And it goes back to what you're dealing with right now, because this is where this battle seems to be winding up, is in the courtrooms. And you and I were talking before the show came on a little bit, and it seems like that is where they're fighting this now, because they don't have an ally in the White House no more like they did with Joe Biden. President Trump ain't going to put up with this mess. But there's only so much he can do on a federal level. It's going to come down to these state courts. And Some of these
Yeah.
judges, January, are evil as wicked as sin, and I think that's where the next battleground is in the courtroom.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is a couple of things. The executive orders are a great start, and it certainly gives people like myself a lot of hope and, frankly, vindication, because for a very long time, parents like myself that were speaking out were called horrific names for simply trying to protect children from unproven medical interventions.
That's right.
And so we are grateful for the executive orders. President Trump has an incredible team. It's very clear from the way that these executive orders were written that he has the right people in place that truly understands this issue. The fact that we have to state in law now that there are only two sexes and that sex is binary is really truly unfathomable. This was never a disputed fact prior to the late 90s. So it's really incredible. So what we're seeing is a couple of things. I don't know if you've heard of a woman, an incredibly brave woman named Jamie Reed. She is a whistleblower out of Missouri, and she was a lifelong, very progressive Democrat who saw the harms directly being done on these vulnerable teen girls. And, we're also seeing boys, but mostly girls. And so she came out and she has blown the whistle on it. And what she talks about in a lot of her testimonies is how part of her job was to go give this activist pseudoscience training to judges. So this is why we are seeing our judicial system in many ways captured by the same ideology, the same junk science that has captured our medical professional associations, my field of psychology and psychiatry. It's no different. We are seeing the capture of many, many different institutions over the false idea that a child can be born in the wrong body and that people can change their sex based on these basically sex trait modification procedures. I mean, that's what they are. No matter what we do to our physical bodies, sex cannot be changed.
That's so true.
And unfortunately, this lie has taken root. And then, of course, you throw in the myth of suicide, that these kids are all going to commit suicide if they're not medically transitioned, which there is zero evidence to support that. In fact, the evidence we do have shows that the suicide rate actually increases post-transition. So it's really, really important for people to understand how we got here, because it's going to take some time to undo the level of indoctrination that we are seeing in all of our institutions.
I could have said it better, and I want to ask you a question about what you said about the courts and what they're doing. This activists giving these courts training. Where does this stop? And is there anything? And again, I'm going to just preface what I'm going to say to you by this. Look, all these executive orders. I love what you said a while ago. They're a start, but unless we codify this in the law, then what's going to happen is this, and God forbid we get another Joe Biden in office. God forbid we get a Kamala Harris in office. But January, these people, I'm going to tell you, it just shudders my mind to think where we would be today, a month and 2 weeks into a Kamala Harris administration. I got a feeling, my friend, you'd probably be in jail. They would probably be coming to you and your husband because they would consider what y'all did trying to keep your child from transitioning illegal. And that's where I think we were headed with this country. I think that we were going to turn into a dystopia society where a heterosexual couple that had a normal child, a boy and a girl, could not function under the society that they were trying to plan. But my question to you is this: other than codifying the executive orders in the law, what can be done to stop this executive judicial activism? Because that's their thrust. And where does that stop? How can it be stopped? And I know that's what most of the questions out there in that audience are, because I get that asked all the time. What can we do to stop what they're doing? And, right now it's sort of hard to see a way out of this, because the judicial branch, unfortunately, is part of the government. It's part of the three-pronged executive, judicial, legislative branch. And there's got to be some checks and balance on these judges. And it just don't seem there is right now.
Well, let me address what you said before. I mean, I don't have, a crystal ball. I can't tell you what would have happened if Kamala had won. I can tell you that things would not feel as optimistic in this area in particular as
Agreed.
they do.
Yes.
We are really, Americans are tired of the transgender nonsense. They
They are.
just are. And as much as everybody wants to move on, you have to understand how much work still needs to be done in this area. And if you look at polling, over 70, and some polls even show up to 80% of parents, and excuse me, 80% of Americans do not want males in female sports. They absolutely believe parents should be informed if their children are struggling over issues such as, distress over their sex. But one thing that we have to do and understand is the US is now an outlier in how we are treating this type of mental health issue, especially when it comes to children and adolescents. When it comes to adults, I don't believe this magically becomes good medicine. I will tell you that right now. If it's bad medicine for a 17-year-old, it's not good medicine for a 25-year-old. But when it comes to the treatment of children, other countries have absolutely moved away from this affirmation only model. And that's where we really got into trouble here in America, is when any child that came in and proclaimed this trans identification was to be affirmed. No questions, no exploration of co-occurring issues that may be the true root of the distress, no differential diagnosis. And so you have other countries like the UK who have done these systematic reviews, which is the gold standard of research. And I would encourage your audience to read the CASS review, CASS.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very well-respected pediatrician, Dr. Hilary Cass, who did a 4-year systematic review on the state of pediatric gender medicine. And she, like so many others, found that the risk outweighed the benefits. And, the bottom line is we don't know the long-term implications of stopping a child's puberty perpetually, not temporarily. And then when you find that, they sold us that on the lie that this was a pause button, that it gave children time, that these were irreversible, things that would happen when you take puberty blockers. None of that was true. None of that is true. Up to 97% of children, once they are placed on puberty blockers, go on to cross-sex hormones.
Wow.
When you understand that they were cutting the breast off of girls in our country as young as 12 years old, you start to understand how evil this agenda truly was. This is the largest medical scandal against children we have ever seen.
Why do you think more doctors have not spoken up against this, out against this? I know there are some that have, but the medical community at large, because you got to have a medical community that's complicit with this, January. It's not just, look, there's forces in the government, there's forces in this nation, there's forces in this world, this universe, whatever, spiritual forces, there are political forces, there are all sorts of forces. But you just hit something, is the medical community needs to be held to an account for what they've done, because this is, look, it's a crime. I'm just going to be talk straight and blunt here for a minute. It's a crime to rape a child. You go to prison for that. It's a crime to sexually abuse a child. You go to prison for that. We were reaching a point in this discussion, in this crazy world that we were living in, that the people that were doing the things like they did to your daughter and tried to do to your daughter, and others that have had this situation done, and these cutting their breasts off of kids, nothing was being done to them criminally. That was looked upon as being normal. And you see, to me, that's a criminal act. That is a morally repulsive act, but that's a criminal act. And the medical community needs to be held to an account of it. I know that's a hardcore line, but is it a fair statement to say that doctors are partly responsible because they've not stood up and said, hey, we're not going to do this?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, doctors would stand up, were losing their careers.
Yeah, they were.
You have doctors, especially, it also varies by state. So this really is going to come down to a state by state fight, unfortunately, Chris, because there's only so much that you can do at the federal level. And I think President Trump and his administration is going to do everything at their disposal that they can do. But ultimately, this is likely going to come down to a state by state battle. And so when you have doctors that are trying to stand up against this in California and Oregon and states where they have doubled down on this ideology over evidence. You brought up abuse. There are cases in California where parents are being accused of abuse for trying to protect their child from this medical pathway. That should tell you everything you need to know about how evil this all is when a parent is trying to protect their child from sterilization and loss of future sexual functioning. And I think that once Americans fully understand what these interventions actually do, the rate of people against this would be so much higher. But it's been normalized and it's been lied about. And so it's just, like I said, it's going to take time for the truth to reach people that don't understand. I do think there are some people, Chris, even when faced with the absolute truth and overwhelming evidence, they are not going to be able to admit it.
I'll agree.
Especially those parents who have allowed irreversible damage to be done to their child. I can't imagine the kind of cognitive dissonance that parent would have to endure to admit that they were duped and they were tricked into allowing the sterilization of their own child. How do you walk that back?
You can't. Why do you think the mainstream media has carried the water for this? And because I'm thinking, look, our show here, you will always have an wide open door guest like you. Anybody that any parent wants to come on and talk about this, wide open, they can come talk about this. But the mainstream media has alienated folks like yourself. They have called you, as you said, all sorts of names, and you're the abuser in the minds of the left because you're trying to protect your child and parents like you. Why have they been so complicit in this, do you think? I know it's an opinion question. Yeah. Like you said, we can't see a crystal ball. We can't see into their heart. But what's the media's role? Because look, there's not too many outlets, January, that you have. I guarantee you can't go on NBC, or I would say even maybe Fox you could, but there are very few outlets out there other than conservative news cycles like maybe Gateway Pundit, Newsmax, things like that. You could even talk about this and not get cut off. You can't go on the mainstream media right now and talk about this because they won't let you, because they're on the people trying to mutilate the kids.
I think the tide is turning on that, and I'm grateful for that. We have seen some cracks in the facade with a couple of opinion pieces in the New York Times. I've had a couple of the local, NBC, CBS, ABC news stations covering parents like myself. So I think that we are starting to see the tide turn because, again, overwhelmingly, the vast majority of Americans support reason. They support the truth. And so, I've been on Fox, and of course, Fox and Newsmax and places like that have been covering this issue for a long time now. When you ask why the mainstream media was captured, you have to look at the money that was being poured into this. GLAAD, GLSEN, the Human Rights Campaign, the Trevor Project. Look at their financial statements after 2020. We're talking about millions of dollars poured in. And GLAAD is the one that was going to the AP style guide. I think that's what it's called. It governs what reporters, how they can write. And they were being forced to use wrong sex pronouns, to refer to men who said they were women as women. That's why you see these ridiculous headlines like women inmate rapes other woman. No, that's a man.
That's a man.
Woman with penis. No, that's a man. And so you really just have to look at the money that was being poured in and the stronghold that these NGOs and activist organizations like the Human Rights Campaign had over the mainstream media. And I think partly they were also worried about being sued by the ACLU, the Human Rights Campaign. You know, the Human Rights Campaign, they also had all of these, they were almost like a survey, for better or worse. They had them for, it was called an index. They had an equality index for schools. They had an equality index for hospitals. And they would go to all of these, these institutions and say, well, how friendly are you to our trans community? And so they were getting all of these things in place, the safe space, flags and the stickers and the posters, all of these things that was just creepily pushing this ideology in the hospitals, in our schools. There's a lot of ways that this is still being pushed in the schools. You've got the GSA clubs, you have social emotional learning. Oftentimes it's taught, if you hear the terms comprehensive sex education, that comes directly from Planned Parenthood. And guess what Planned Parenthood has been doing for the last 4 years? They have been giving out testosterone and estrogen prescriptions like they're candy with no there's just no safeguards anymore, Chris. You can go into a Planned Parenthood and get prescribed testosterone within 30 minutes.
Lord have mercy. What a nightmare. Let me ask you this, and along these lines about the money. Look, I know a lot of people are mixed on Elon Musk. I think that the man's doing a great job. But what have you felt personally when you've heard some of these figures of money, the million, not just a million or two, but multiple millions of dollars, basically that have propped this stuff up, that they have found? Just look, we're talking about, I'll just use the Department of Education right now. Look, just within the Department of Education, some of these studies that they were financing to the tune of $20-30 million a study. The USAID, these international funds that are going overseas that our tax dollars have been going to. How did that make you feel? I thought about you a lot over the last few weeks because I said, I bet January Littlejohn's got something to say about this, because it's got to be mind blowing that we would have been spending this kind of money out of this government to promote this evil that you've been describing over this last half hour already.
Yeah, I knew it was happening, but I did not know on such a global level how much they were pushing this, especially like in other countries. And so I knew years ago that there were grants funded by the CDC that were pushing the GSA clubs into the schools. It was right on their website for anybody that wanted to go see. So I knew it was happening. I didn't know to the extent. And all of these DEI initiatives, it's all from the same ideology.
It is.
It's all from the same ideology. So I always said sunlight is the best disinfectant. This is one of the reasons why we went public with our story, Chris. Sure. Courage is contagious. And like I said, normal Americans are fed up. They don't want this stuff in our schools. They don't want it in medicine. They just want to be treated for whatever condition they're going to without having any kind of ideology shoved down their throat.
Yes. I'm just curious, have there been any more, you mentioned the lawsuits about the other states, has there been any more filed in Leon County against the school board there? Did any of the other parents stand up with you and help you in this fight?
No, I had many that came to me and thanked me, and many even that had it happen to their children. But Tallahassee, unfortunately, is very blue. It's very liberal.
It is.
And there were a lot of people that were very concerned to rock the boat. You have a lot of state agencies here. And so people that work in government were concerned. And, for me, Chris, it took me almost losing my daughter to realize, take it. Take it all. I don't care. Take my house, take my husband's job. Just give me my child. As long as I have my children, we are going to be just fine. And so, unfortunately, I think it has to really impact people personally before they're willing to risk as much as we did by going public.
Well, I'll put it like this. We're both faith people, and we faith folks better wake up, because these are the forces. And look, I am so tickled. President Trump's in power. I am. I voted for him. I'm so glad that we're on the path we're going right now. But I do not believe for a second that this fight is over. I think it's going to get more intense. And I think, as you said, it's going to be on the state level. Buddy, we got about 5 minutes or so. I want to let you talk about a little bit about the a few organizations that people can go to and get more information. And I guess, if this was a live program, we were having questions. I guarantee you, one of the questions that would come up would be from parents that have probably children in the same boat. Where do they go for help? What do you suggest to a parent that is experiencing this same nightmare that you and your husband experienced with your daughter? What do they do? Where do they go? How did they stop this tide? And then for us folks at me, look, I use my platform for folks just like you to help and get information out there for people. And we stand with you. I've told you privately. I'll tell you publicly tonight. I have the utmost respect for you as an individual and what you have done to bring this situation to light. It breaks my heart for Tallahassee. It breaks my heart for Leon County. I grew up there. I'm not from there originally, but I spent most of my childhood of teen life down there. And it has bothered me that not more have come to the side, because I think if there had been a class action against that county, maybe things would be different. Maybe. Again, we don't know. But you have stood as a brave voice in this, and one of the few that's willing to get on a public platform and say what's going on, like you've said tonight, and with moral clarity that I don't know too many people have. But what can we do? What can people do out there? And what about that parent that's listening tonight? They got a child, just like January Littlejohn's, that they need some help right now because they don't know what to do in stopping this against their children.
Yeah. Well, let me address the what can you do first, and then I'll address what can parents do, to not only protect their children, but if they have a child that's experiencing this kind of confusion. Since this is coming down to a state by state fight, people have got to get involved. And you don't have to get it, you don't have to run for school board if that's not what God's calling you to do, or run for office, but you do have to be engaged. And, one of the things that really needs to change state by state, we should not be allowing citizens to change their sex marker on their birth certificate. This is causing a huge amount of chaos and confusion. And in fact, I was helping a gentleman in another state, and he is having trouble. This man has a full beard. He's bald, has all kinds of health issues now from being on estrogen for many years. There was a lot of trauma there. He can't get his driver's license back to his birth sex. And so there's unintended consequences from, making it more difficult to change the sex marker. That's not what we need. Sex cannot change. We have got to stop this. And thankfully in Florida, we have stopped it. But there are, I think, at least 26 other states where they allow citizens to change their sex on their birth certificate, on their driver's license, on other types of identifications. And we need to stop that. So that's the first thing. If you're still in a state that allows these types of interventions on children, we need to stop that. There is overwhelming evidence at this point that this is harmful to children, that there's going to be a wave of children that are going to experience regret from these irreversible changes and harms being done to them. So that's second. In terms of protecting your children from this ideology, I co-authored a church guide for pastors and parents. It's called the Church Transgender Response Guide. You can download a digital copy or order a hard copy at childparentrights.org under resources. I encourage every parent to read that guide, take it to your pastors, because we have got to get pastors engaged on this issue. If they are not speaking the truth from the pulpit on a regular basis, they are not doing their job.
Amen.
So
great.
That's first and foremost. Parents also need to be engaged in their children's school. If you are not recognized as a sole authority in the school, in the doctor's office, anywhere that you are bringing your child to another adult, you should not be taking your child to that institution. You need to pull them, find somewhere else, find a different school, find a different doctor. Opt out of any lessons on gender identity ideology and make it very clear to your child's doctor, you do, well, A, never leave the room, but B, make it very clear to your child's doctor that you do not consent to your child being asked any questions about gender identity or sexual orientation. That is not why you're there. You are there to get a physical or get your child's ear checked because of an ear infection. And so those are really easy things that parents can do to protect their children from this. Obviously, I am not a proponent for any child under the age of 16 having a smartphone. We could talk about that at a different time, but it's really important. You know, we have a parenting crisis in this country right now, Chris.
We do.
And we have lost our rightful place of authority within our own families. And part of being able to
Amen.
parent your child through this type of confusion is being able to sit in conflict with your child. It is being able to provide healthy, appropriate boundaries to keep your child safe. And that may mean conflict. That may mean for a short amount of time, your child is going to hate you.
I'm not laughing. Look, you're right. Better them to hate you now than to be destroyed later. And I'll just leave it.
That's right. And not all parents are willing to do that, Chris. They're just not.
That's true.
And it's unfortunate. You know, Dr. Leonard Sachs wrote a fantastic book that I recommend called The Collapse of Parenting. We have to get our rightful place back in our family in a place of authority for our children. But I'm here in my personal capacity. But if parents want more information, I have put together a parent resource page at doknowharmmedicine.org. That's a great place to start. There are so many more resources and books and podcasts now to help parents parent their children through this confusion, just like we did with our daughter. So many parents are coming to me after the fact, 6 months, 8 months, 2 years later, even saying, thank you. My daughter is completely free of this confusion. Because you know what they need, Chris? They need their parents to stand in the gap, say no to them, protect them, stand in truth from a place of love and compassion. You affirm the distress, not the false identity, and you give these kids time. Most of them just need the gift of time. Even kids that experienced real, true, like historical gender dysphoria, if you gave those kids time and you didn't socially or medically transition them, statistically, the vast majority of even those kids would resolve their distress after they went through puberty.
That is so well said. I encourage, we'll have all this down at the bottom of the show tonight where folks can visit. Final question. Next time you're on, I would like us to pick what you just said up a little bit more about the parenting crisis, because I think a lot of it does come down to parenting, and I do want to talk with you more about that. And I want to talk about the spiritual aspect of this, because you brought up another thing, and I'm going to give you a quick question and we'll wrap it up tonight, and I'm going to bring it back on next month. And I hope we can get you on very much this year regularly as your schedule allows, because you know you've got a welcome door here. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, how has the church handled this situation from pulpits in our country?
I would give them a solid 3.
Wow. Wow.
I think that some churches, you know, the churches that are engaged, Chris, they're doing a fantastic job.
Right.
But the ones that have sat on the sidelines, or worse, allowed this ideology to infiltrate their churches, they have completely not only abandoned biblical principles, they have abandoned these families in a time of need when the church should have been there to stand in the gap to protect these kids from the lies of this ideology, because this ideology is completely antithetical to biblical teachings. The Bible is very clear that we are created in his image, male or female.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I feel the Holy Spirit on that statement. I believe that. And there's going to be an accountability of these pulpits for their lack of conviction and moral clarity. And I think it's an issue. I'll rephrase this as we close tonight. It is more than moral clarity, it's spiritual clarity. Because the Bible is not ambiguous about this. The Bible
Yeah,
pretty
Chris,
tells you.
and I want
Go
to just
ahead.
say, it is not unkind to state the truth.
Amen, buddy. Amen.
And
Come on.
this whole ideology has really hijacked and redefined words like kind and support. The kind thing to do is to tell the truth. And a detransitioner named Laura Smalt said that. She said, when you get tired of living the lies, you don't turn to those that were willing to lie to you. You turn to those willing to tell you the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. That is what we should be doing as Christians, standing firm in truth out of love and compassion for others. We can show love and compassion for those struggling without affirming a lie.
Buddy, that's so deep, I'm going to leave it right there. I think it's a good way to go out on the show tonight. Listen, I want to thank you for being with me. And I'm going to come back and say something to these folks here in a minute. Listen, I want to thank you. And one more time, that website, donoharmmedicine.org. Is that correct?
That's
And
correct.
I will make sure that it's down there, folks. We want to thank January Littlejohn. She'll be back with us tonight. If you another time, not tonight, but another time next month. If you got a question for McFilesForum@gmail.com, and if you want to come through the show to ask it, I'll be glad to forward them to her. And then maybe next time we'll answer a few of them on air. Buddy, I cannot tell you enough personally. I appreciate you. I'm praying for you. Been praying for you ever since I met you and talked to you first time. And I'm praying for your family, and I'm praying that God will open more doors and more doors of utterance, because we need your voice right now more than we've ever needed it. And as I said, I sense maybe a change of direction from the federal level. I know the battle is not done. We're in the trenches, me and you out here, and the battle in the trenches is going to get more intense, and we're going to need your voice. So keep yourself safe is all I can say. We're praying for you, buddy.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all you're doing. God bless you, Chris.
Folks, we'll be right back. And that is Miss January Littlejohn. Smith Littlejohn, I should say. January Smith Littlejohn. What a beautiful lady right there. And we had the pictures up. That was her Tuesday night standing by Melania. During the president's speech, President Trump had invited her to come and so forth. There was a special picture she posted on her Facebook page, and I hope she don't mind me hijacking it. But you remember the little kid, the beautiful 13-year-old that had the brain disorder? Look at there. That's her and him there. And we're going to talk about him more tomorrow night, and the vile, disgusting comments of the MS Nothing But Crap Network. And we got a lot to talk about tomorrow night. But it's 11 o'clock, and I'm not going to keep you any longer tonight. I do want to ask you real quick. You got about 5 minutes max. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Good to see Mark Kaysen. If you got a question or a comment, put it in there quick. Put it in there quick. We'll take a few questions from you and see if we can answer them. It is grateful to see everybody we've had tonight. We had a really good crowd for Victor. And we've also had a good crowd for January, but it is late, and I know we don't have as many people here. I did post her interview with the White House press corps online tonight, and I encourage you to go listen to that. But this interview that we did had just been done just a few days before Tuesday night, and I was very proud. And when my guests tell me to keep my mouth shut about something, I keep my mouth shut about something. And she didn't want nobody to know she was going, and I understand why now. And but it's all out there now. She was there, and I'm proud of her representing a lot of parents that this has happened to. And Mark, I agree with your statement. It is very powerful. It is very powerful, and so forth. If you got any questions, folks. She was very knowledgeable, Pat. She was. And she's one of the best authorities on this I would know, because she's had it happen to her. She's had it happen she's had it happen to her family. Thank God the daughter is 18, about to graduate. But this nightmare is far from over. And I just pray these courts, I don't have a lot of faith in the courts. I pray the courts make the right decision. But as we're finding out in this battle for our nation, the courts are betraying us left and right, including the Supreme Court. It's ironic that I said a statement to you last night or Wednesday after the Tuesday night of speech that I believe that there was something up with Amy Coney Barrett and Trump. And I'm not talking about something fallacious, but I'm talking about the way she looked at him was, I don't know if it was bitterness, anger, I don't know if it was disgust, I don't know if there's a personal axe to grind. John Roberts is just a turncoat. He's been a turncoat for 20 years now. He was appointed to the bench in 2005 by George Bush Jr. People had hope for Roberts that he'd be a conservative justice. He's been nothing but. He sided with the liberals several times on issues, and sometimes it's just political posturing. But this decision that they handed down yesterday to force the Trump administration to pay these past agreements by the USA people, and some of which went to promoting transgender agendas for kids, was absolutely insidiously crazy and insane. We could have handled Roberts going the other way. We expected it. I did not expect Amy Coney Barrett doing it. And we're going to talk about that more tomorrow night. But I predicted it. I said Wednesday. And D.C. Drano picked it up as well. And D.C. Drano is a pretty big voice out there. And when I saw him post his ex-post, I said somebody else saw it too. Somebody else noticed it too. So we were right on that Wednesday afternoon and last night about her. There's something going on with Amy Coney Barrett. I don't know what. And it ain't psychological issues. It's just not psychological. Mark says, they don't have any business with these children. Mark, I'll agree with that, bud. It's good to see you tonight, man. It's always a pleasure to see you. You know, I love you as a friend and a brother. You're precious. And no, the school board does not have any business telling our kids to transgender or to transition. Mark, you're absolutely 1,000,000% correct. Our kids are our most present treasure, and these school boards, somebody needs to be in jail for that. To me, it's criminal. It's criminal. I know that the courts ain't going to see it that way, but it's criminal. Okay, listen, we're going to talk about all this tomorrow night. If you got questions, McFilesForum@gmail.com. Thank you all for being with me tonight. 2 shows. I'm going to let you go. We're not going to keep it at midnight. I'm tired, and I know you are too. Have a good night, everybody. All you West Coast folks, and get some rest tonight. And all you folks in the East, get some rest. Watch the replay. Share, like, and subscribe to our networks on the McFiles Faith side and the McFiles News Network. I will see you next time in the morning for our morning Bible study, and we'll have a news wrap-up tomorrow night for an hour or so. Headlines, some videos. It's a Friday night. We'll be a little light. You know, I hadn't broke the bear hat out for the first time in who knows? If you'll promise me you'll join me tomorrow night, you may even get the bear hat. You could get McDonald singing. You can get McDonald dancing. Ain't no telling what McDonald will do on a Friday night. One thing he probably won't do is behave, but that's okay. I want to thank January Littlejohn for being with us tonight, and also Mr. Victor Avila earlier tonight. 2 great McFile shows. Did you enjoy them? If you did, put some fire in that house for both our guests, and be blessed out there on a Thursday night. Our prayers for Australia. We'll have a hurricane update in the morning. And that storm has slowed down, and it's going to hit late tomorrow night, which would be actually in the morning into Saturday morning. So tomorrow is going to be a very dangerous day for the east coast of Australia and Brisbane and Queensland. That is exactly where Cleotis and her family live. And they are okay, but they are waiting the storm. See you tomorrow.